everyone, it's Sevy and I'm back with another Kujou Sara video. This time I wanted to share with you my gameplay experience and observations with using a C6 Kujou Sara on other Electro characters. After all, C6 Sara is when her synergy with Electro teams gains a huge damage bump, and for some it might make her a mandatory support to be paired with other Electro characters even over Bennett. I tried Kujou Sara with my other built Electros, Beidou, Fischl, Keqing, and Raiden Shogun of course. Sadly, I don't have a built Electro MC and Lisa, so I'm sorry to those who would be curious about my thoughts with them too. If you want to share your experience using Sara with them, do let me know in the comments. I also won't bother with Razor anymore since he's more of a physical character anyway. This also won't be a damage or numbers showcase again, it's more of how they synergize well with one another in terms of talents and gameplay. So let's get started. First things first, I should clarify how Sara's buffs work with snapshotting on other characters' skills. I think many players are aware of what snapshotting means, so I won't discuss it in too much detail here. If you're not familiar, you can go check out other great guides that explain this in detail. I also have this past video on testing Fischl with an Alley Hunter where I explain the snapshotting mechanics. The key thing to note is that snapshotting is based on the character's inherent stats, which you can see in your stats page. When you apply Sara's attack buff on the character, you can pause and check the screen to see the attack stat going up, as you can see here. However, her C6 works differently. If you check the crit damage stat, there's no additional 60% to the crit damage. It remains the same. This is because her C6 is conditional. The crit damage buff only works if the character deals electro damage. Otherwise, if it applied on their inherent crit damage, then if they do a physical damage from an auto attack, it would also get additional 60% crit damage. The C6 effect is like an external buff. It's there and it works under the electro damage condition, it just doesn't reflect in the character's stats. This will be relevant because of Fischl and Beidou's snapshotting mechanics, which I will demonstrate soon. One last thing to be reminded of before we proceed with the characters is that Sara's attack buff lasts 6 seconds. You can gain her attack buff from the following: her charged shot Crow Feather, the Crow Feather she leaves when casting her skill at C2, and her burst. So first up, we have our favorite prinzessin, Fischl, whose electro damage comes from Oz. I use my Fischl as an off-the-field support, but even if she's your main DPS, my comments will still apply. I would say that this pair is the biggest micromanagement headache. Let me demonstrate in the following gameplay and pause at key moments. Here, I get Sara's buff before summoning Oz. This 11k damage is Oz critting. This 4300 damage is Oz not critting. Now this is the point when Sara's attack buff goes away. 6 seconds have passed already and the buff animation is no longer present on Fischl. The next crit is weaker, only at 9200. However, the non-crit damage is still at 4300. You can see here in action that the attack stat snapshots with Oz and his non-crit damage remains the same even after the buff has passed. Meanwhile, the crit damage bonus is gone. Now here's the kicker. If you re-summon Oz, it actually re-snapshots the current stats that Fischl has. What this means is that if you re-summon Oz, either because you need to move him closer or you pressed it accidentally, his electro attacks will now deal less damage. This might not be a big deal if it's done when he's about to expire, but if you re-summoned him like 1 or 2 seconds just after you first summoned him, well then that's bad news. To get back his higher damage, you'll have to reapply the buff on Fischl, then either re-summon Oz, or if your burst is ready, use your burst to summon a new Oz with the updated snapshot. Alternatively, if you forget to buff Fischl after summoning Oz, then you can switch to Sara, generate the buff to get it with Fischl, then re-summon Oz. Honestly, this is already a bit too much micromanaging. Maybe you can afford to ignore it and just go unga bunga and hope you get the timing right every now and then, but that means you can't maximize C6 Sara's buffs on Oz. And since Fischl will most likely be a sub DPS that you switch out the moment you summon Oz, you'll have to juggle that Sara will buff your on the field main DPS. This is much easier if you have her C2. The team rotation might look something like this. Let's pretend that Zhongli is the main DPS. So yeah, Sara really requires you to put the quick swapping work in to juggle all those buffs. Is that fun or too difficult? I'll leave that for you to decide. Next up, we have Beidou. So it's a more straightforward gameplay experience here. Buff her before she uses her skill or burst and you'll enjoy Sara's added damage. However, the caveat with Beidou is, like Fischl, her burst won't snapshot the C6 Sara's crit damage buff. I've had a couple of commenters ask this in my last video with Sara, and sadly it really doesn't snapshot. Let's see it with this footage. Beidou's burst's crit damage with Sara's buff is almost 14k. When the buff expires, the crit damage is only at 11k. Beidou's burst lasts for a long 15 seconds. Sara's attack buff, on the other hand, lasts 6 seconds. So if you want to get the higher crit damage, you'll have to switch back to Sara in the middle of Beidou's burst duration and reapply the buff to Beidou. It should last for the remainder of her burst duration, which will probably have 5 to 6 seconds left. Again, that's more micromanaging on your part. One nice perk about putting Sara and Beidou together as sub DPSs in your team is that Beidou at C6 decreases the enemy's Electro resistance by 15%. At least this allows Sara to get stronger burst damage too. So moving on to Keqing, I can say that the gameplay experience is very enjoyable and their timing synergize pretty well. It's all a matter of getting the crow feather buff from Sara as Keqing infuses her attacks with Electro, then just keep whacking away at them. Keqing's Electro infusion lasts 5 seconds, so you'll get Sara's buffs for the entire infusion duration if timed right. By the time you need to reapply Sara's buff, then you can simply use her charged shot since it's still saved up, or use her skill since the cooldown should be done or almost, or use her burst if it's available. Pretty easy, right? I also like that Keqing can innately increase her crit rate by 15% after casting her burst. This will help ensure that she'll get more mileage from Sara's crit damage bonus. Do note though that her burst doesn't snapshot, so it's best to use it right after you get Sara's buff for maximum burst damage. Aside from what I showed earlier, here's another cooler method of getting the buff. There's not much to say about Raiden other than that they're made for each other. Raiden's 7-second burst times well with Sara's 6-second buff. Raiden's Eye of Stormy Judgments can increase Sara's already strong burst damage, and if you have a C1 Raiden, she gains resolve stacks much faster due to Sara being an Electro character. I tested Raiden and Sara together in a previous video if you want more info on that. I'll link it in the description below as well. Again, I wasn't able to show off Electro Traveler and Lisa since I don't use them as much, but I think some of my insights might be relevant to them. And if I'm not mistaken, their bursts don't snapshot, so the general comments of having to reapply Sara's buff is still applicable. And that's it for my thoughts on Sara with other Electro units. The most common issues that people have about Sara are that she's simply not as good as Bennett, especially if she doesn't have C6, and that Sara's gameplay is clunky and tedious for some. And that's understandable. In some ways, my experience does reflect those. But personally, I like the involvement she requires from the player, and it's a refreshing difference to the long unchallenged attack buffer Bennett. I should also mention that automatically pairing her with another Electro gets you the Electro resonance, although I'm sure many players just brush it off as a resonance with underwhelming effects. We all know right now how Raiden's discussions are centered around Electro needing a buff. Lastly, I wonder how Sara will synergize with Yae. I think that MiHoYo should really ensure that they at least complement each other. In fact, looking to future Electro, there's this question now of how well can Sara synergize with them as a support. I suppose we'll just have to wait. If there's anything I missed, please do let me know in the comments. And that's everything, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do leave a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and turn on that notification bell button, and I will see you soon. Take care!